Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for May 3rd, 2022. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, please.
Member Brennan.
I am here.
Councilmember Lehman.
All right, he's here now.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras. Here. Mayor Mars.
Here, thank you very much. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. Moving on, first, happy May to everybody, and happy sun. The sun came out today, so a couple weeks ago I offered a promise, and I delivered here. The sun's out, and it's 60-some degrees, so that's great. Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Any changes, corrections, addition? Mr. Reynolds.
Nothing from staff, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Contreras.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I can second
I
that.
have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting to approve the agenda as stated. Further discussion? 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 By roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman. Councilmember Whiting.
Aye.
Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. The agenda has been approved. Thank you very much. Moving ahead to the consent agenda. Any changes, corrections? Mr. Reynolds.
No, sir.
Thank you. Consent agenda. Councilor Whiting.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further comment? Seeing none, I have a motion and a second for the consent agenda as stated. Before we vote, we would read the consent agenda into the public record. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for May 3rd of 2022. 4A1 approves the city council meeting minutes for 19 April of 2022. 4A2 authorizes a purchase of a 3-year renewal for the ESRI software licensing. 4A3 approves an on-sale and Sunday liquor license for Mallard's Shock, LLC, doing business as Mallard's Restaurant. 4A4 approves liquor licenses for 2022 and 2023 and waives the city code requirements for Global Restaurant Group and Stonebrook Golf Club. 4B1 approves the Community Center Renovation Activation Project. 4B2 approves the rebranding of the youth building and approves alcohol consumption in the space. 4B3 approves a temporary and on-sale liquor license and authorizes street closures and support for the Shakopee Big Taste of Fun. 4C1 adopts Resolution R 2022 Tax 069, setting the public hearing date for a vacation of a roadway easement east of 125th Street. 4C2 approves a contract with RJM for construction manager as agent for the Sand Venture project. 4C3 approves a contract with Confluence for design services for the Sand Venture project. 4D1 adopts Resolution R 2022 Tax 068, authorizing a master partnership contract with the state of Minnesota for professional and technical services. 4D2 authorizes the execution of an encroachment agreement with Magellan Pipeline Company for the Morris Street, 13th Avenue, and Hansons Avenue Utility Extension Project. 4D3 authorizes the purchase of a prefabricated restroom for $214,905 for the Quarry Lake Improvement Project. 4D4 approves the purchase and installation of street lights in the amount of $285,426 for the River Bluffs development and the Levy Park Trailhead. And 4D5 approves yield signs at intersections in the Countryside and Countryside Second Edition neighborhoods.
Mr. Reynolds, thank you very much. I have a motion and a second for the consent agenda as presented. The consent agenda has been read into the public record. With no further discussion, by roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman. Councilmember Whiting.
Aye.
Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. The consent agenda has been approved. Let's move forward now to item number 5. Now I'd like to recognize any citizen resident that would like to come forward and make comment on an item not on tonight's agenda. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, and welcome on an item not on the agenda. Mr. Reynolds, have we received any electronic communication?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Seeing none coming forward, we would move ahead then. Number 6, business removed from consent, there was none. Item number 7, I'd entertain a motion to go into recess for our EDA meeting. Counselor Lehman.
Make a motion to recess, go into the Economic Development Authority meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to recess to the EDA. Further discussion? Discussion by roll call vote.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Lehman.
Aye.
Councilmember Whiting.
Aye.
Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. We stand in recess for our EDA meeting. Madam Chair, the floor is yours. Madam President,
you.
excuse me.
Thank you. I call to order the Economic Development Authority meeting on May 3rd. And number 2 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If you could just speak up and not raise your hand because I can't see you.
Chair, I make a motion to approve the agenda.
And
There's been a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Although I will take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Lehman.
Aye.
Commissioner Whiting.
Aye.
Commissioner Mars.
Aye.
Commissioner Contreras.
aye.
President Brennan.
Aye. Number 3 on the agenda is the consent business, and item 3A is the only item on the consent business, which is the EDA minutes of April 5th.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Whiting. I'll make a motion to approve the consent business, including the minutes.
Okay, there's been a motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Contreras. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye, or I'm sorry, by roll call vote.
Commissioner Lehman.
Aye.
Commissioner Whiting. Commissioner Contreras. President Brennan.
Aye. Item number 4 on the agenda is the general business, and there is nothing tonight. Item number 5 is the reports, and on that is the EDA bill list. Is there any questions on the EDA bill list? Okay. Item number 6 is the adjournment to Tuesday, June 7th.
Motion to adjourn to May 7th? No, June 7th.
June 7th.
Madam President, Commissioner Mars here, I'll second that.
There's been a motion and a second to adjourn to Tuesday, June 7th. Can I take that by roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Mars.
Aye.
Commissioner Whiting.
Aye.
Commissioner Contreras.
Aye.
President Brennan.
Aye. Meeting stands adjourned.
We'll reconvene the Shakopee City Council meeting back into session for May 3rd, 2022. We just completed our EDA portion of the meeting, and we are moving ahead then to 9A1, which is a city-county license agreement for library services. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. What you have before you is a draft agreement that we will send over to the county once you have approved this or whatever form it actually ends up being. The city attorney's office has reviewed this in detail. We've talked it over at some length. And essentially what we have here is a document that does really 2 big things. One, it removes the legal ambiguity as to whether or not what the status of the current agreement is in regards to a building that it used to be under and now it's a new building. This obviously would take care of that issue. But the bigger thing is it talks essentially about the very fundamental nature of what the agreement is in regards to the services that are provided in the building itself. As this council knows, the building was originally given over to let the library use. It is still a city-owned building, but it was given to the county to use to provide library services. That was some time ago, and I think over time there's been a slip in what some people determined to be the definition of library services. The county actually came here and basically said that anything could become library services, and that's what the former director of the library system said here in our chambers some months ago. So in recognizing that we would like to at least have the ability to have city council make a determination as to whatever in there that is not traditional library services, for you to have a vote on that matter, that's what's in here. It essentially says that we're looking at traditional library services that would be considered those things around reading, writing, studying, classrooms, study rooms, computer uses, etc. And if the library or the county want to do something different, they simply have to come here and ask permission. You guys can weigh that and make a determination at that point. So essentially, the city will continue to pick up all the expenses for the library, except for the interior items that actually are for library service itself, such as the books, tables, etc. But we're responsible for the building in whole. We're responsible for paying all the utilities. We're responsible for making sure that it's plowed. We're responsible for making sure it's safe. We're responsible for making sure it's insured, and the county is responsible for library services. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions at this time.
Mr. Reynolds, thank you for the overview and the effort on this memo and new agreement here. Councilor Lehman.
Mayor, two questions. The first is the meeting space. In the agreement, it talks about the last paragraph, first page, second to the last paragraph. The agreement makes clear that the city retains the right to use for its purposes any portion of the building that is not actively used by the library for library services. How do we work out the use of the meeting room space for our community and the library's needs?
Well, that is essentially library services. Libraries have meeting spaces that they have for personnel, and the library will be responsible, as they have in the past, for reserving that particular space.
So the city won't be able to have any say in the scheduling of that for community groups?
We really wouldn't look to do that, although it is important to recognize that that is for the public. It is not another county office space. Quite literally, half of that space is now scheduled with county activities, and that's not what that space is designed for.
Follow up?
That's one concern that I have. Unless we have enough space throughout the city and city buildings for our community needs, then we need to be able to have some flexibility in using that meeting space to meet our community needs also. Then I just had one other question that I didn't see in the agreement. Maybe it is, and I missed it. Staffing. The county will be responsible for all staffing related to library services?
They will, except for facilities maintenance. We obviously are responsible for that.
Okay. And it does say that they provide the staffing for the library services?
Correct. That's part of what they're responsible for.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Councilor Whiting.
Oh, thank you. I'd like
Staff?
a follow-up on the public use room. You had sent out a memo that the county had booked that, public use room for the county services. So anybody that, other than the county, can't book that room now. So it's now not necessarily a public use room, it's a county use room.
Well, and that's what we really need to, and hopefully that's what this is going to address, is that, that is a public meeting room, and it's not another county office. And, you're quite right, Councilman Whiting, when you have that booked half the time, that means that there are organizations and people that can't use that, and that's not what it was designed for.
Councilor Whiting.
Continue on. So right, and part of our agenda tonight was talking about adding more community rooms because there's such a demand. So we're investing more because we can't use this room. Another follow-up. At one point in time, there was a library board. Was that a city board, county board, building board? How did that work? Do you know?
It's my understanding from talking to Mayor Williams from Savage, who obviously was a longtime member of the county library system, was that there was a board that essentially consisted of different members from different parts of, from different cities, that all then had responsibility for running the library system. They were a governing board. At this point, I believe when Mayor Williams left her position, it wasn't too long after that the county, that went away, and the county became the overall determination as to what was going to happen. So that governing body went away. And frankly, that governing body was in position when we had the old agreement in place. And that was also an initial issue of concern, is that, well, you've changed the whole governing structure, you've changed the building. I mean, clearly we've got to take a stronger look at this.
And then, let me make sure I covered everything. In past, community ed classes, I think, were booked out of that room, mostly out of schools, I think. But was that room used for community ed even, or?
I don't know the answer.
I don't know if it was, and then I think, so in my point of view, community ed's finding their own rooms for schools and things, and the county has this new building. But now they also need this space too, and so what was all the space expansion they did? Do they need to grow again? I just have some concerns there. The library board would have been a good liaison possibly to this board. Just that use of that room that the public can no longer use, that's a big concern. And I'm not sure if it was spelled out completely in this document about how that room is going to be used, but if it is, maybe you can point that out.
Well, I think, it's a public room. I think to reserve that, the county acts as the reservoir of that. You call the county or.
The librarian.
In the library, and they schedule that. It's still a public meeting space that's available to anybody. Yes, it looks like that group doing some goodwill in the community is soaking up some time, but I have never heard of an organization saying, geez, I can't rent that room or can't use that room, excuse me. Okay, we don't control that portion. I mean, I know your organization, the Heritage Group uses that.
Sure, yeah.
On a Saturday. Never heard that they haven't used it, so. But the amount of usage out of 100%, now ranging at, it's kind of cut down because of that use. There is another room in the library as well. It's a smaller room in the northwest corner. So I think the first step here, as we worked on this a couple of times here, just trying to get the basic agreement updated and kind of codified into a new agreement. I like what we see. It talks about traditional library services. It leaves that use open until if the county would ever come forward and have an ask in front of this council. Any other further agreement would be an add to our basic agreement rather than built into our basic agreement, addendum or something. That's kind of how I envision it. But Councilor Contreras, did you have comments?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I'm in favor of this. It's something we have that is needed. The agreement between, the city and the county, to just establish our roles and what we're doing. So, perfect. I'm all in favor. And hopefully we can work together and continue to provide the services that we do. I mean, not these, but what is allowed.
Right. Councilor Brennan, did you have comment on this?
Yep, I did read through it. I would like to know what traditional library services are and why we're using that terminology. I think that's changed over since, the existence of time with libraries, and that's no longer, I don't know what that is. I mean, I worked at the library. I don't know what traditional library services means. So if we can either define that or just strike that from there, I would I would really appreciate it. I'm wondering if the county has had a chance to look at this agreement. And I'm wondering if this agreement is building relationships or what's the thought on that? At the past meeting, 3 of the council members had suggested that we sell the building, and I'm wondering if that's been looked into.
Okay. Mr. Reynolds?
Well, I'll deal with the last question first. We are getting an appraisal for the building. I said at the time I didn't think that the county would buy the building, and I inquired about that, and the county has no intention of buying the building, but we are getting an appraisal on that. As far as the term traditional library services, I think if you look at the grant of license, it spells out pretty clearly what we're talking about. In consideration, and I'm going to read it, for the use of the building, the county must use the building for the sole and exclusive purpose of operating a branch library, providing access to books and other materials, computer and technology services, classes on literacy, and areas of general interest, and meeting rooms and study rooms whose purpose is to provide resources and services in a variety of media to meet the needs of individuals and groups for education, information, and personal development, including recreation and leisure. Meeting rooms should be used for library-related programming or for groups or individuals of culture, civic, intellectual, informational, and educational purposes. They will not be used by county departments or human service partners for the delivery of human service programs or medical or dental services. So that is essentially the definition of what we're talking about. I think it gives a clear idea as to what is expected, and frankly, if there's something that the county wants to do and they have questions, they can certainly come in front of City Council and they can basically talk to City Council, and then the council can determine what they want to do. The final issue in regards to whether the county has seen this, the county has not seen this agreement yet. I did not want to send it to the county until I had what this council wanted to do. So as soon as the council gives me a thumbs up or thumbs down or wants some changes, we can then make that happen.
Okay. More, Counselor Brennan?
Yep, I would like to remove the word traditional from the document.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilman, we can certainly do that. If we do, I think you're talking about paragraph 4A that says operate the building solely and exclusively as a public library delivering traditional library services. If we take that out, I think we would want to say delivering the services set forth above in paragraph 1, because that's the paragraph that Mr. Reynolds read from. So if there's some concern about that phrase, we can take it out, or you can leave it in, traditional library services as set forth in paragraph 1, whatever you'd like to say. Either way works.
Yep.
Counselor Lehman? Or Counselor Lehman, and then I'll come back, Counselor Brennan.
Mayor, in my mind, I'm thinking traditional library services. The word traditional to me would indicate things that are consistent with overall library uses throughout multiple counties even. I mean, if you take a look at a 5 or 7 county area of library uses, and let's say they're all offering books on a second language education or something like that, or even some type of a afternoon class on a second language. This is typically a traditional learning type thing with the research and resources that you would find, be it book-wise or electronically from a library. So I think traditional is trying to mean the general expectation of a library in general for the time.
Okay.
Do you want to say something first? Or?
Counselor Whiting?
You know, I can understand where Councilor Brennan is coming from with traditional, because libraries are evolving. Now, we've pretty much spelled it out in the grant of license what our expectations is, so I would be comfortable taking out that word traditional out of that section 4 and stating it as Mr. Thompson said, referencing back to the paragraph of the section 1 on the grant of license, referencing what our intention is. But I don't want to limit it by saying traditional, because you could say, well, that's only books, that's not computers, because, you know, what's traditional? I don't want to limit it because the scope could change in education and learning aspects.
Okay, Counselor Brennan, I said I'd come back. Counselor Brennan.
I don't have anything else to say besides what Mr. Lehman has, or Mr. Whiting just explained. So if we can put that to a motion, I would be willing to do that.
Counselor Contreras.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to add something to where she said if we were, Counselor Brennan mentioned if we're continuing to partner, you know, we are clarifying that if the county wishes to conduct other services, all they have to do is ask. So the door's still open. We just want to know what's happening there.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I think that's where I stand. I'm traditional library services. I think computers came into vogue in the 80s, are kind of common now. I like the word traditional, and certainly it does not in any way prohibit the county to come in front of the council to say, this is what we would like to do, here's our plan, this is what we'd like to do or expand or whatever. And then, obviously, the county would be on board at that time, and then it has an opportunity for either the council to get on board at that time or not. I think that's you want to talk about a partnership, right? And then both boards would be on the same page and as an addendum to the single new updated agreement. And the updated agreement currently has the word traditional in it, so those are my takes on it. But I don't know if we should, thinking out loud here about if we had a motion on the word traditional, if that's what you wanted to do, Counselor Brennan, or make a motion on what we're trying to do here and then make a amendment.
Yep, I would like to make a motion to remove the word traditional from section 4.
Should we start with a motion for the, should we start with a motion for the item?
Just to the remove, okay. So a motion on the,
It might be better to get a motion on the table to adopt it as is,
The amendment.
and then Councilmember Brennan can make a motion to amend
that's
it.
what I was trying to suggest.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So there is a motion on the table.
Was there a second to that motion?
I haven't heard one.
Second.
That was not my motion.
Sorry. Okay, no.
One more time, Counselor Brennan?
I did not make that motion to approve the agreement.
No, she made a motion to amend the agreement by striking the word traditional, and that motion was seconded by Counselor Contreras.
Withdrew her second.
She withdrew her
Yeah,
second.
Okay.
Your motion still stands to change your wording to traditional. Further second? Second. The motion dies due lack of second. Counselor Whiting.
Let's try to put the motion on the table first and then amend it. So I'll make a motion to approve the license agreement between the city of Shakopee and Scott County.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the licensing agreement as stated. Counselor Brennan, or discussion, Counselor Brennan.
I would like to amend that motion to remove traditional from item number 4A, and then put the wording in that Attorney Thompson had suggested.
All right.
I can accept that as a friendly amendment, if you want,
Okay,
legally.
Okay. Should get a second.
yeah.
It's a motion to amend, we need a second.
Okay,
Get a second.
Second.
Okay.
so I have a main motion and an amendment motion, both with seconds. We'll start with the amendment first, and Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, Mayor, I'm going to request that this amendment be first specified. Instead of saying what Mr. Thompson said, I'd like to be clear on exactly what the wording is.
Okay, motion maker, Counselor Brennan.
Maybe I can
Or
help.
Mr. Reynolds.
So paragraph A would then read as follows: operate the building solely and exclusively as a public library, delivering library services, including responsibility for all management and control as outlined in paragraph 1.
I agree.
Okay, so, and then paragraph 1 is the grant of the licensee?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Counselor Brennan, is that acceptable to your amendment
Yep, I agree.
and acceptable to the second? We're only talking about the amendment to remove tradition and point out that that would read then, and then point number 1, grant of licensing would carry the day of the definition.
Correct.
Correct? Counselor Lehman.
So, Mayor, legal technical question, does this change any, the overall agreement?
No.
Mr. Mayor, no. Just a question of what traditional means, and some of you have concerns about it, some of you don't. So it doesn't change the fundamental.
Semantics and wordsmithing, is that what we're doing here? Wasting everybody's time?
No, it's valuable. It's valuable.
Counselor Brennan?
I heard that, Matt, and I
right.
take criticism from that.
I didn't mean it that way, I just meant, if it doesn't change anything, why are we doing it?
Because it's important. I think that traditional is no longer a valuable word to say in the library services.
I
Well,
concur.
and that, if we're gonna take the word traditional out, and it refers to section 1, the grant to the licensee, I read this definition or paragraph on that, and especially the second to last sentence, that they will not be used by the county departments or human service partners for the delivery of human service programs, medical, or dental services. So I understand taking the word traditional out. I'm okay with the wording in the grant of the license. And to me, that is an update and a change to the previous language. That was very ill-defined in 1977.
It's probably state-of-the-art in '77.
All right. Amendment and a second on the floor. Further discussion on the amendment to remove traditional and reference item number 1 in the agreement. Further discussion. Discussion by roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan?
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman? Aye. Councilmember Whiting?
Aye.
Councilmember Contreras?
Aye.
Mayor Mars?
Aye. The amendment passes to strike the word traditional out. Now we're back on our main motion to actually approve this now modified agreement. Motion on the table in a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan?
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman?
Aye.
Councilmember Whiting? Councilmember Contreras? Mayor Mars?
Aye. Thank you very much. I thank staff and our city attorney for working over this agreement. That was what we gave direction for. There's been a lot of auxiliary talk about this, expansion of service or whatever we want to call it. I know we had a meeting of the Scott County mayors a week ago, and this item was of discussion, and kind of everybody's understanding about trying to get an understanding where what it is, what's the concern, what's the future of libraries, and I would say in general, the Scott County mayors have some concerns over this as well, not far from what we've talked about in a meeting or two. But anyway, we will move forward then. Let's move ahead then to 9B1, which is the Windermere Community Park Final Concept Budget and Professional Services Agreement. And Alyssa will present. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Alyssa Olson, Senior Planner. So I have I'm back with a final concept for Windermere Neighborhood Park, along with a revised budget and 2 professional service agreements necessary to move forward with design and construction. So you may recall this parcel is on the southwest corner of 17th and Windermere Way. It's across the street from Benedictine Senior Living Facility, and it's a unique site. So it's wooded, it has bluffs, ponding, and the top of the parcel is one of the highest elevations in the city. It is in the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Master Plan as sort of the main park for the developing Windermere neighborhood, which we've been collecting park dedication funds from for a while now. It's also in the CIP for 2022, and we brought an original concept to you in December. We've done quite a bit of community engagement on this project. We had a website, Signs in the Park. We sent letters to the neighbors. We had an online presentation when we were more on lockdown. We had an open house at Benedictine, and we brought this to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. So with all of that feedback, plus what we've heard from you so far, we've created priorities for this park, and those are nature-based experiences, multi-generational recreation opportunities, and ADA accessibility. So that's what we've heard. So with those in mind, this is the overall concept, and I'll zoom in on some of these. So the main parts of the park haven't changed since we brought this to you last. We still have this nature playground or nature-themed playground that's built into the hillside. These photos are features that we have in the plan, just to give you an idea of what it could look like. There's some traditional amenities here, picnic shelter, bike racks, things like that. We've included a lot of seating, thinking about how this is across the street from Benedictine and having a place for seniors maybe to bring their grandkids. And we've added some retaining blocks to make sure that this trail that runs behind the playground is at a ADA grade. There's a nature trail on the northern end of the parcel. So it's a gravel trail, it's still ADA compliant, and it has lots of seating nodes along the way, along with some interpretive signage. And this would be good for all ages. And then at the top of the parcel, we have the hammocking areas, which are very popular with the teenagers. And we have some native plantings that would be sort of an oak savanna type of environment, and then some picnicking amenities, a seating area, some more interpretive signage, and then of course the tower, the observation tower. And we are proposing constructing this whole top area in 2023. So when thinking about the tower and how we wanted to plan it and build it, staff thought that it may be best to work with someone who specializes in this type of thing. So we are recommending working with a company called Create Play. They are in New Hope, Minnesota, but they do work across the country. And they specialize in these type of custom playgrounds or play environments, and they have experience specifically with towers and ADA accessibility. So here are a few examples of towers that they have done. These are all, our tower wouldn't look like any of these because it would be custom to how we want to design it. We would work with them to do so. But this just gives you an idea of kind of their capabilities and their experience. So like I said, we've been collecting park dedication money from this neighborhood for quite a while for use for parks in this neighborhood. And excluding land dedicated and the value of that, we've collected over $2 million in park dedication fees from this developing area, and we're still collecting some of those or we will continue to collect those as the area develops. So the overall cost is 1.7 million. The two items that we are bringing to you today are the design and engineering from Confluence and SRF, and then a proposal to work with Create Play for the tower design and construction. So these are the two agreements, and I just wanted to sort of remind you that we would be bringing back the tower. This wouldn't be the last time that you would have a say in what it looks like or what it's designed like, or the way it is accessible. So that would be back. So our recommendation is to approve the concept plan, approve a professional services agreement with Confluence, and award a contract to Create Play for design build services.
Questions of staff? Counselor Whiting?
And we'll see the tower again,
Yes.
because I don't remember a slide on it. But we'll talk
There's
about
no
that.
design yet. Yep,
Okay,
no design
okay.
yet.
Thank you.
Originally, we had intended to hire an architect and a structural engineer and do it that way, but we think this would be probably a better option for us.
No themes? You got a theme for the tower?
Not yet, but it's exciting. We have talked about it for a couple of years on this. But other questions of staff? Counselor Brennan?
In the park plan, there's a description of what a neighborhood park is. And it states that the playground has to be designed for ages 5 to 12 years old. So and it seems like in the presentation by Create Play, the towers that are in there are primarily for the 5 to 12-year-old age groups. So is the tower part of the playground, and is that something that will be designing for the 5 to 12-year-old group? Or I guess when I originally envisioned a tower, it was for a different age group. I just want to make sure that we're getting into following what our plan says. And
Yes, so these towers that I'm showing are definitely parts of playgrounds. We have control over what this tower could look like. So our intention was that the tower would be for all ages and not just part of the playground situation. The playground manufacturer is separate from the tower design firm, so they would be separate.
So I guess it'd be looking more at a traditional tower than the play tower?
That was kind of our guidance from the plan, but we would take any feedback you have.
Counselor Whiting?
To follow up on Counselor Brennan, in that age group, I guess I wasn't aware that the neighborhood park designation had an age group. Now, I think we're kind of trying to focus that age group to more of the natural features, aren't we, of that type of play area?
Yes. Okay. So maybe I'm not understanding the question, but the playground area down by the road, that's for preschool and school-age children, and that's separate from the tower on the top of the bluff, which would be for all ages, and we would have control over what that looks like.
So we have the focus on the age group to
yes.
be able to call it a neighborhood park?
Correct.
Okay,
yep.
good.
Counselor Lehman?
Thanks, Mayor. The first action on the confluence for 195-426, that's for the overall professional service for the overall park, or does that include any work on the tower that they might do, or will the tower work be done exclusively by Create Play?
The tower would be done exclusively by Create Play.
Okay.
Yep.
Two separate things.
Yep.
Okay. Other questions of staff? I guess, I guess I envision one of those fire towers from northern Minnesota that are 4 stories high and you climb up in the rickety stairs. Those were always an adventure to climb up as a youth, and may still are. But those are pretty spectacular. Those are old school. These are pretty cool, but I've been up in this site a couple of times over the last year, and including just last weekend, and I think to be able to be up off the ground in a tower and look over the expanse of Shakopee is spectacular. This is some of the highest ground in our community, and we've always looked at this as a real focal point.
We could do like Herman the German and really could go all in.
Or we could work an agreement out with RAR.
There you go, get up on the top of that.
Put some malt in there and
That's pretty tall.
That is. But to look at these designs, and I'm sure that other designs in the slides, and see what comes of this for, if Create Play is awarded the contract. So, Councilor Brennan?
Mayor, you had mentioned that this would be a focal point in the community, and I know that the neighborhood parks doesn't have and it doesn't look like this plan has a parking area. So is that something that will only be parking on the street, or?
Good question. I had that written down too. So parking,
As of right now, yes, that's correct.
On the street?
Yep.
okay. There's some curvier linear streets up there, and that's not going to be a problem at all? And can you go back to the map? And in general, if I was up closer to the tower, where am I gonna, let's see what map would be best here. Where would I probably park?
If you were driving to the park and going to the tower, there's two places you could access that. You could access it from Windermere Way near the Benedictine Senior Living Facility, or on Attenborough Street is that southern access point. That's higher up.
Right, and there's a path, I was up there the other day, and there's a path in between the houses there?
Yep.
And that's already installed, and I saw that, okay. Counselor Whiting?
is there an opportunity, I know it would mess with our budget here, but is there an opportunity to look at some additional parking?
We can look at it. There's a lot of ponding in the area, so there's not a lot of flat area for
My
any
thought was maybe
parking.
some extensions on the street to
Oh,
maybe parallel or
yeah.
something?
Sure.
Possibly, I don't know.
There are obviously some great issues, because this is
Yeah.
a signature part of the ridge that we carved out and got as park dedication, so.
Potentially a partnership with the Benedictine group?
Well, I like that, from the pictures with those stones and that, to have the seniors there come take the grandkids, that one on the upper right there. That'd be a nice addition to that, just across the street, so. I really, since D.R. Horton's come through and gotten this land and the style of parks, I know we've upgraded a lot of parks in our community over the last couple of years, which is great, but I had a chance to walk Ridge Creek out at Southbridge. That was a stormwater management plan with a park on top, and it's absolutely fantastic. It needs to kind of grow in, but I think it's going to be a regional draw. Here on the west end, I view this park with a tower, lookout tower, going to be a big draw. More questions, comments for staff?
Big draw, where are they gonna park?
Well, we're talking about that. Counselor Brennan?
I just have one more question. Is there restrooms in this park, or is that porta potty?
Right now, we have a BIF with a fence enclosure.
So you talked about parking on that curvier linear street as well as Windermere Way on the, across from the Benedictine Health Center. Am I gonna be able to access this park from a cul-de-sac on the north side that comes down August Drive, or?
There's no way to access the park from 17th Avenue right now, I believe.
Okay.
Attenborough? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it was down in a cul-de-sac that, I don't know, that was over there, I'd have to look. Thought it was August Drive. But, it comes down and there's some houses and it's a cul-de-sac, and I was looking then to the right, and the park is right there.
Wonder if that was Attenborough.
No, it's right here, August Drive.
Go back one, Matt.
Oh, here, this one here.
Yeah, there you go.
August, yep.
All right. More questions? Counselor Brennan, did you have more?
I do have one more. Was this presented to the Parks Board, and did they have any comments on it?
It was, they generally liked it for the reason that it's a type of park that we don't really have right now. It's unique in that way, so I think it was, if I remember correctly, all positive. Yeah.
Also, to make a note, this park ties directly into the D.R. Horton Parkway, that they have a path, and I think I drive around our community a lot, and I drive through here all the time, and they already have them in. There's 3 or 4 structures laid out along a path. One's got some music, one's a climbing rock, one's a net play structure, so very cool opportunities for that neighborhood and others as well, so. More questions of staff? More questions of staff? Otherwise, Counselor Whiting.
We can take these separate if you like.
Yes?
I'll start with, make a motion to approve a professional services agreement with Confluence in the amount of $195,426.50 for design and in construction services for Windermere Neighborhood Park.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Further discussion? Discussion? Being none, by roll call vote.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman. Aye. Councilmember Whiting.
Aye.
Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. That motion passes. Thank you very much. We have another one that for consideration. Counselor Contreras.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to award a contract to Create Play for design build services for the Windermere Neighborhood Park Observation Tower in the amount not to exceed $500,000 and authorize the appropriate staff to execute the necessary agreements.
I have a motion. Counselor Whiting?
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Guess I had one other question about there was a 20% contingency. Is that on the entire project or is that on the playground part?
It's for everything within the Confluence and SRF scope of work. It's not for the tower. There is some contingency, but not 20% on the tower.
Okay. Just to me, it seemed like a high contingency, but hopefully we can save some money that way. I have a motion on the table and a second. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion by roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman. Councilmember Whiting. Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. That vote passes 4-1. Thank you very much. All right. Next up here. 9B2. Canterbury Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and Michael will present. Welcome. This was a tabled item from our last meeting and back in front of us. Do we need to put it back on the table? No. Thank you. Michael.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, this is the Canterbury Comprehensive Plan Amendment. This is a location. There are 3 parcels. 2 of the parcels are currently used for drainage for both Unbridled County Highway 83. The other parcel is currently Souls Company. The current guiding is mixed employment. On that purple area, we're proposing the guiding to be entertainment district to match up with the rest of Canterbury. If you can remember, the Unbridled was put in this kind of curved fashion, so everything to the north of Unbridled remains mixed employment, and everything to the south now would be part of the proposed entertainment district guiding. It meets the criteria and findings required for a comprehensive plan amendment. and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval. Staff recommends approval of Resolution R 2022-056.
Questions of staff? Questions of staff? And this is really just to move the land use aspect of it, correct?
Mayor and Council, that's correct.
Councilor Contreras?
Thank you, Mayor. I reviewed it. I know this was tabled, but I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah.
If, adopt Resolution R 2022-056, a comprehensive plan amendment to Figure 4.12 planned land use in the 2040 comprehensive plan. Sorry.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting, and discussion, Councilor Lehman.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm not actually opposed to the land use change. My concern is the underlying TIF district that entertainment sits on. Entertainment venues tend to bring, well, we know it brings a lot of outside folks to the venue. In this case, it's 19,000 people per occasion. And we also know the stats of most of our arrests are from people that don't reside here. So I'm envisioning a large outside population utilizing our services and no dollars coming off of the parcel, well, all these parcels actually, to the general fund for these services. So it's not a land use issue, it's an underlying policy issue, and that's water under the bridge at this point, but it is what it is.
All right, I appreciate those comments, Councilor Whiting.
Question, so now that we've changed this configuration of land, do you disagree that this isn't a good use of the land?
Actually, if you listen to what I just said, I said I'm not opposed to the land change.
But that's what's in
use.
front of us.
My concern is the underlying policy, prior underlying policy decision, which now this is placed into a current TIF district by past action, which does not afford tax dollars to go into the general fund to pay for services that are going to be required on this parcel for the proposed venue.
Okay, so you're looking beyond the land use issue.
Yeah, the land use issue isn't the issue to me. Actually, if you're going to put a concert place up, the road infrastructure is probably the best in this location. The problem for me is when you bring 20,000 people from outside of our community, our statistics that we receive every week show us that the majority of our arrests are from outside non-residents, okay? And if that's the situation consistent with the rest of the community in this area, there's no dollars coming into the general fund to support them services, which means the rest of the community pays for that.
Okay, Councilor Brennan?
So it's not a land use issue, so I shouldn't really be bringing it up because it's not germane to the
Right,
issue
we
in
should
front of you.
stick to the issue in front of us, but that's fine. Councilor Brennan had her hand up, but let's.
We'll give her a moment, she may come back, right? Is that okay?
Councilor Brennan, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to call the question.
Just a comment that I think
Yeah.
the TIF district will be paid back faster with this investment.
I appreciate that. We do have a motion and a second. The question's been called. No further discussion. By roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman. Councilmember Whiting. Councilmember Contreras.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye, that motion for the comp plan amendment passes by a supermajority of the city council. So thank you very much. And I appreciate that this Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to remind everybody that we're moving into workshop mode, which means that it's a little more relaxed. It's meant to be a little more give and take. As long as you don't throw anything at staff, we'll all be good.
Thank you. Yes, we are having a workshop on the long-term financial plan, and Nate's here to present. Welcome.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Nate Reinhardt, Finance Director for the city. Tonight, as Administrator Reynolds mentioned, we have a workshop on the long-term financial plan. So I had this exact same slide last year. Last year was the first time that we've compiled a long-term financial planning document, but it provides some background on why we created this document. Unlike the annual audit report and to a lesser extent the annual budget book, there's no set guidelines or template to follow in a long-term financial plan. So there's some flexibility on what we want to provide within the plan and how we want to use it. In my opinion, our plan that we utilized last year and is in front of you this year provides a good job presenting data from the past to the present and gives us an idea of where we're going without getting bogged down by a lot of narrative or details. One of the items that came up in the debt rating report a couple of years ago was the discussion on the long-term financial plan. S&P did review our financial plan with the most recent credit rating a couple of months or last month, and happy to say that it was viewed as strong, which was a step up from the previous report. And directly quoting from the ratings report, our change in assessment stems from the recent implementation and council review of a robust long-term plan that used several years of trend analysis and projections with different levels of inflationary revenues and costs assumed. So, so they obviously looked at it as a bright spot. I have this flow chart at the bottom of the slide that illustrates how I view how the long-term financial plan fits in. It starts with overlying and established city goals and priorities and policies that are used in the development of the long-term financial plan prior to developing the shorter-term focused annual budget, then followed by the review of financial performance. So I see tonight as the first step in the budget process to really look at things from an overall long-term financial direction before the city determines their annual needs. The benefit of going through an exercise of developing and evaluating the long-term financials is to really look at things from a long-term perspective versus the short-term one-year decision-making perspective. The long-term financial plan that's being presented tonight has two main areas, trend analysis and general fund projections. For the trend analysis, I'll go through a series of charts that I think will help tell a picture and you can get an understanding of where we've been and where we're going. Each of them cover a 10-year period. For the general fund projections, I think this gives a realistic expectations over a long period of time for the general fund operations, which can set the preliminary expectation for what you may see or expect in a given year when setting the annual budget. And then last year, we incorporated the long-term financial plan within the capital improvement plan. It is our intention to continue to do so. And then again, this document is considered a plan. There's no formal action necessary. And then it doesn't obligate the city to act in any certain manner.
Nate, can you talk a little bit about how a plan is essentially a snapshot?
Yeah, so we had this conversation, and it's really, the data that's being used is based on the 22 budget and the 2021 assessment year for the 2022 property taxes, and based on the last audit report we completed in 2020. Obviously, that's always changing, right? We're almost to the process of completing the audit for 2021. The assessment, we've got preliminary numbers for the next assessment year. So depending on when you're looking at it, the numbers are always changing. So we do know that our assessment for pay 23, those numbers are going up at a faster rate than what's shown on here. We know there's inflationary impacts that you can see today that may impact some of the general fund costs going forward. So it's certainly a snapshot in time, but gives you at least a general understanding of from a typical year what you're looking at, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So the first few charts, I've split out the amounts by property type, but in two different charts. The first chart will show ag, apartment, commercial, exempt, and industrial. The second chart will show residential and totals. I pretty much had to split these out in two different graphs just because of the size difference, just to be able to see the actual data on the chart. These charts for property types are, and this chart and the next chart is based on parcel count. So this chart shows the property types by parcel since 2013. Interesting to see that commercial has stayed relatively flat over that period. Conversely, the number of apartment and industrial parcels have grown. The ag parcels do show a large jump in 2022, but that's not necessarily the case. Since it is parcel data, it's a reflection of the ag parcels large ag parcels being broken down into smaller parcels, and next year they'll be shown as residential, so. Same chart as the previous one, only residential versus total. Residential parcels have increased by 637, and in total, parcels have increased by 1,260 to a total of 15,000 as the payable 2022 year, which makes sense as, again, some of the larger ag parcels have been converted to multiple residential parcels. In the packet I provided, it also has charts on taxable market value, but I've used just the tax capacity slides for the presentation because it pretty much just gets at the same thing. So we've seen significant growth in tax capacity over the past 10 years. Apartment from 1.6 million to 4.9, commercial from 4.7 million to 6.9, and industrial from 4.7 million to 13.2 million. For residential, we saw an increase of 20.3 million to 37 million, and in total, 32.2 million to 63 million. So in total, this is a 95.8% increase in citywide tax capacity over the past 10 years. This chart shows the Shakopee's fiscal disparities net contribution in terms of tax capacity. So this is the net amount, what the city contributes and what the city receives in distribution. The city is the 10th largest contributor to the program. With a growing industrial tax base, has gone from 1.9 million of tax capacity in 2013 to 6.1 million in 2022. To put that in context of the percentage of total tax capacity, it's almost 8% of additional tax capacity that the city of Shakopee is contributing to the fiscal disparities program. So this slide shows the net tax capacity. Excuse me, I can't talk. The net tax capacity captured by TIF districts in the city. 10 years ago, it was about 177,000, where in 2022, it's 3.6 million, which illustrates that we have been successful in increasing tax capacity through these TIF districts. Keep in mind, these developments would not have occurred without the use of TIF, but we've generated about 3.6 million of additional tax capacity. That in time will be added to the city's tax capacity. The years listed is the year the district was decertified or the required decertification year. It doesn't take into consideration some of these districts that will likely decertify even earlier. For example, RAR, which is depicted in green, was decertified at the end of 2021, so there's nothing shown in 2022. Here's the levy components over the past 10 years. The levy was at 15.5 in 2013, increasing to 22.9 million for the current year. As you can see by the gray shaded portion, one of the factors being the community center ice arena debt issue that increased that. This slide shows the changes in city levy by dollar amount and percentage, and the corresponding impact on the city tax rate. So a few different numbers on the slide, but I think it's helpful to have all in one spot. Over the past 10 years, we've seen about $815,000 increase per year in property taxes. However, we have seen our tax rate drop significantly since 2013. It was at 42%, and now it's down to 32.1%. Population data from the 2020 census, the city's population is now 43,697. The 2010 census was 37,076. So over a decade, population has increased by about 6,600 or 18% in the past 10 years. Then the final slide here is on full-time employees by functional area. Public safety, which would be police, fire, and building inspections, and then park and recreation, which would be the community center and ice arena, are the areas that we've seen employees added. This slide provides just some reference points from the previous 10-year changes and how it competes to an annual average. These are all compounded annual rates, meaning that the percentage increase will increase on the percentage increase, if that makes sense. On average, over the previous 10 years, we've seen our tax capacity grow by 7.7%. Our total amount we levy as a city, which would include operations, debt service, the EDA, and the capital projects fund, increased by an average of 4.5%. Part of this being, again, the debt service for community center and the ice arena. The levy for the general fund operations increased on average by about 2.6%. Revenue from charges for services increased 3.4% per year. This would be higher if it wasn't for the impact of COVID in 2020, which brought that number down from where it was last year. Our revenues, like intergovernmental revenue and permit revenue, they seem to bounce around quite a bit from year to year, so I couldn't put really a good number on here as a reference point. It really depends on kind of what years you're looking at. Where the other figures shown here are for the most part increasing incrementally from year to year. On the expenditure side for the 4 functional areas, general government increased 7%, public safety 4.2%, public works 4.6%, and parks and rec 5.6%. And then looking back at those expenditure-driven increases, it's pretty much primarily staffing changes and staffing costs that have been driving those. And then also for a reference point, I plugged in the typical hourly rate of a patrol officer, which is about a 3.1% increase over that 10-year span. The next slide is the 10-year, well, I've got a summary about it, but the next slide coming up will be the 10-year general fund projections. Again, the 10-year projections use the 2022 budget year and the 2022 payable year for market value information. We assume that on the expense side, general government, public works, and park and rec would see about a 2.75% increase for expenses, and then for public safety, because of the larger makeup of personnel, we've added a additional 0.5 percentage point. On the revenue side for licenses and permits, intergovernmental and charges for services, we used a 3% annual increase. And then for taxes, we plugged in the number there based on those assumptions and what it would take to maintain a 35 to 50% targeted budgeted 35 to 50% targeted fund balance of next year's budget expenses. And if all the assumptions are correct, and granted each given year will have its own impact, it would require about a 4.25% annual increase in property taxes. So that's what we use to drive these 10-year projections here. And I figured they'd be pretty hard to see on the screen, but I know I've provided that at least within your packet. The chart here shows the projected figures looking 10 years out. The items on the bottom of the kind of the bottom of the graph here, there are the lines for the ending fund balance in comparison to the 50% target of next year's budget, the annual change in total revenues and expenditures by percentage, and the impacts on the levy. Then, as a reminder, we plugged in 4.25% as the needed amount for the property tax levy based on the assumptions used. For those impacts, we used the 2022 payable year as the base year for taxable market value and tax capacity, and then increased those by 5% from year to year, or actually 6% from year to year, and the median value home, which was increased by 5%. Interesting to see that under the scenario of increasing the levy by 4.25%, if we see tax capacity grow by 6%, we'd still see a declining rate over the 10 years. An average value home increasing at 5% would see their property taxes grow by 4% per year. I also added projections for the number of households and population based on the Met Council data. The taxes per capita increase is a little bit smaller at 2.1%. The annual increased numbers for revenues are below what we've seen in actual data from the 10 previous years, but I think it's relatively reasonable. Another thing to consider is if we see continued increases in licenses and permits, intergovernmental, and charges for services that exceed 3%, they could have corresponding expenditure increases that support those revenues too. So in other words, some of the expenses go hand in hand with the non-property tax revenues. And it's not always a direct impact on the property tax line. So with that, again, purpose of the presentation to look at things from a larger perspective. I think it helps in terms of understanding where we've been and where we might be going. And it's more about going through the exercises and having the discussion. So I think it's a good first step in the budget and CIP process.
Good. Thank you, Nate, for your presentation. So given the assumptions of inflation's interest rates, growth, you're saying that basically the tax need over the next 10 years in general is about 4.25%.
Yep, I think that's kind of where we fall in that 4 to 5% range, and I think another way to kind of backtrack and see if that makes sense is to look at the previous 10 years, and that's kind of what I've looked at on these reference points here, and we're seeing about a 4.5% over the previous 10 years, so I think that's probably in line with what you can reasonably expect.
You know, I just like the CIP, anytime that we can extend this, and I know that it gets a little foggy out there, but I value the exercise, and I like to, you know, look forward and see. Obviously, and just like the CIP, when we come back, it's, you know, a 1 or 2 year plan, but I think, obviously, we've never done this before. Now we're coming into our second year on this, so I think there's some benefit, and it gives you some benchmarks actually to follow as we go back. We need a little more time, right, to do some analysis, but I think it's a very good exercise.
I think you stated it right. As it gets farther out, it gets foggier and sketchier, but in the next couple of years, we got down, but and things change. So, but thank you. Yeah.
Other questions of staff? Other questions of staff? Nate, thank you very much for your presentation.
Yep, you're welcome.
All right, let's move forward here to our second workshop item, which is 10B, our emergency management update and refresher. And Chief Tate, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. It's been a long time since we've had any type of discussion or tabletop exercise on emergency management, and that's on me. I can't blame COVID or anything like that. This is something that we've been talking about for a little while. Mr. Reynolds and I initially wanted to do a more facilitated tabletop exercise with council, but because it has been so long, I figure at least for tonight we'll get into a little bit to the refresher, go over roles, responsibilities for council, for staff, and then if you desire later on, we can talk a little bit more about a tabletop specific work session where we can devote the proper time and effort into that. So real quickly, kind of big picture stuff, state law requires you to appoint an emergency management director. You have done that for the police chief. There is a state certification that comes with that that I have to have. The assistant emergency management director, Captain Harris, also has that emergency management certification. We have one other sergeant that's completing that in the process, but we also have 5 members of the fire department that have already completed that certification, and I think a few others that are in the process right now. That is not a class that you go in on a Monday and a week or 2 later on Friday you get your certificate. It takes 2 years. It's a very extensive, comprehensive program, and we never talk about the fact that we have 7 people that are certified right now and on our way to probably 10, and hopefully that gives you and residents some comfort from a training and education standpoint that we do have staff that's been through this, and that's not the only training that we've had, but I also think it gives us a lot of continuity in operations if you got into something extremely long cycle-wise, that we have people that'll be able to take over shift after shift in an incident command role that have the proper training. The emergency operations plan is currently going under an update. It's got in final draft phase. We'll be submitting that to a few outside individuals for subject matter experts for review. You should be getting a new one here hopefully in June. Again, with an emergency operation plan, that's not a plan for every single little thing that can go wrong. It's a plan that assigns duties, responsibilities to certain departments within the city, individuals within the city, and just how overall actions will be coordinated. When I talk about how we get a little complacent and maybe why it's easier to fall asleep emergency-wise here in Scott County, this may be one of those. That's why I included this slide. You see, you know, since 1950, we've got 19 tornadoes, and I've heard a lot of reasons why. It's the topography, we're in the river valley, so forth. I think it's LeSueur County has about 3 times the emergency management budget that Scott County does. Well, why is that? They've had more incidents. I look at it a little bit differently. I think we're due. You have to kind of look at that and say, when is that next one going to come? We've certainly had our wind and flooding events over the years in the city, but it's eerily similar to, I think, our storm data to what Joplin, Missouri had prior to their major event. So as a city council, what is your role? I think the biggest thing you can remember as an elected body, your role in the National Incident Management System, Incident Command, is that of policy making and not operational. There's a reason we're not in the EOC for a work session like this. This is where you're going to be if a disaster happens. This is where we need you to make those tough policy decisions, and they're not all easy ones. Some might be, some are, as you'll find out, are very, very difficult. It'd probably be easy when I wake the mayor up after a tornado and say, I need an emergency declaration now, bring you in. We're going to need council to extend that declaration. Visible leadership, I want to talk a little bit about that. I've heard a few mayors that have been through tornadoes talk about how they've kind of feel like they've been put in a corner when they're in their role in their city hall. And one mayor, the city's escaping me right now, but he commented, I remember what he said. He said, it wasn't until the governor came that I realized I do need to get out. And it is important for you as a council to be visible, both to city staff and to your constituents. The way we do this, though, is through effective communication. All right, that visible to your constituents is not in the rescue phase, search and rescue phase necessarily. And communication is so important. Yes, keeping the public informed. It's important to have one clear voice in a disaster. Again, avoids conflicts, and it's also important to channel anything that we want to say to through the EOC to make sure nothing catches, A, it's accurate, and B, it doesn't catch them by surprise. When I went through PIO courses specific to emergency management, you didn't have all the social media that you have now. You've really never been more accessible. And anything that you put on Facebook, a comment to a resident, can easily get turned into, well, now the city's going to clean up this, just put your stuff out on the street. You can see how easily that can get turned around. So again, communication is vital. It's important. It's important that you remind residents and feed them into the city communication, because we're going to get hit with scam, storm chasers, things like that. I touched on this earlier. The mayor has the authority to declare an emergency. That's anything in excess of 3 days would require the rest of city council. Again, this allows us to incur obligations, enter into contracts, rental equipment, cut through a lot of red tape that normally would slow us down in a disaster and emergency.
So you're saying, Chief, that as mayor, I can declare it, but just for 3 days, and then we would need full council approval then to extend it, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Actually, you need majority of council,
Yes.
Good, thank you.
not full council.
So as we go through this, I just threw this up as kind of an example just to get your thinking about what happens here. This is, south of the hospital. We've got, some lighter construction materials. If you had a tornado go through here and just hypothetically wipe out every single house that you see, and there would be debris and damage that would go beyond this cone that you see. And the reason, I just want you to keep that for future slides in the back of your mind. as a reference point. So when we look at assessing damage right away, in that picture that you just saw, are we going to hit any of these thresholds with uninsured public property? I don't believe so. I don't believe we're going to even come close to some of those thresholds. For the county, 618,000, that's a high number. We have hit that before, not back then it was in the 530s, I think, that we hit. That's when we had to cut through County Road 69. We had some flooding issues, and Shakopee, I was a part of that, did get federal assistance and state assistance at that time. Minnesota DACA there, that threshold, just over 300,000, if we hit that, that would incur 50% reimbursement to the city for those costs. So again, just because, you know, what happened there is a lot of residential homes, private property, insured property. We're talking about uninsured public property. So even if the park would have been in the way there, it's going to be tough to hit some of these thresholds.
Counselor Lehman.
This might be just a little confusing, but if this scenario happened, we might not meet a threshold for the uninsured public infrastructure damage limits, but you still have an active situation that the city's going to have to take an action on to try to manage.
And we're going to get into those slides a little bit, because it's not just I mean, that's a major deal in this city. If you're seeing, and this is going to take an exceptional amount of time to recover, probably well over a year to fully recover and rebuild. At least in the initial, again, just to remember, just because you have a storm go through, hitting these thresholds can be very, very difficult. We document everything. We've done it before. We did a good job doing it at that time. That was the feedback that we got from the feds when we did get reimbursed. But we keep track of absolutely everything, because you never know when you might hit that threshold.
Chief, is this just damage, or is it costs, like for overtime and things like that?
Everything associated with a disaster. Okay. I shouldn't say everything. In terms of especially when we get into debris management here in another slide, maybe I can hit that question in another slide here. So again, our initial response, we've got a fire department that would be out there. Every scenario is different. Are we the only city that got hit? If that's the case, we're going to have a lot of mutual aid that comes in, and Rick and his crew will be able to, you know, at least go through there from a search and rescue standpoint. We'll have to close roads. We'll have to have Steve's folks go through and at least get roads access, depending on how many trees down, those types of things. Sheltering has become a little easier than in recent years. Again, the Red Cross would help us with that, but we do have a lot of hotels, and we are a metro location, so finding places to at least house them wouldn't be as difficult. Immediate policy decisions for you. Obviously, the emergency declaration is one. Think back to that location. And every policy decision I'm just spitting out here for you to think about is one that a city council has had in this exact type of scenario. Okay, I'm not making anything up. These are things that we've taken through debriefs and from other cities that have gone through these kind of lessons learned training. Curfew would be something to talk about. We're not going to be able to put a fence around all of that. We're not going to have enough barricades and so forth to keep everybody. You just physically cannot keep everybody out, even if you have a lot of officers. And there's the location there. There's always going to be people going south on 83, as long as that road's open. And you have a lot of issues with theft, the overall scene safety, and that people shouldn't be there. So a major policy decision would be a dawn to dusk curfew, which is what a lot of cities do or ask for at that point. And this would all come from situational briefings that either I, the fire chief, if it's debris management, Steve would be in there, and then anything in terms of inspections, you would see Michael in there.
And they might be area-specific, too.
And area-specific, and we, you know, I always say too, I said in this initially, we'd be able to get a lot of mutual aid. The cavalry's not always coming because, you know, a storm like that's probably gonna take care of some other cities too, and we would get what we have, and we've got a good emergency management crew in Scott County, and I think that would help some of the mutual aid. But you're right, Councilor Lehman, I mean, we would try and zero this down to that specific area. One of the biggest things that you're gonna have to think about in that first 48 hours, and I say first 48 hours because a lot of these policy decisions you're not gonna be able to table to the next meeting. We're gonna need decisions on these now. So it's good to think about these things, and debris management is a big one in a tornado or a significant windstorm. We have a history of that in this city. I remember the 1998 one. It had just started here. There are a lot of decisions with debris where you take it. We're lucky we have the ORF. That's close to us. But there is significant policy decisions for you to make that impacts specifically the Public Works Department. Are you going to clean up everything? The city of Hugo took everything that went out to the curbside. To your question about FEMA reimbursement, FEMA will reimburse us for life, safety, anything that we can relate to a public safety, a public need that's storm related. They are not going to reimburse us for the television set and toilet seat that somebody throws out there. If that is something you do, well, our history in this town has been that for these windstorms, you get it to the curb, Public Works is going to come pick it up. Whether it's
But that's on us.
And they still do it.
I know.
After the storm.
Yep, and they still do it. And that's a history, that's probably an expectation of the community that's out there right now, based on the fact that we have done that. And it is a little easier since we do have a place. I remember in '98, all the debris went right where we're standing right now. Took a long time for the tub grinders to show up. Started to stink a little bit. But
And everybody got free wood chips for quite a while after that.
I do remember that. But as your emergency management director, and Steve and I have talked about this, we would implore you to only, as a policy for the city, take storm debris in terms of wood, no television sets, those types of things that people are inevitably going to put there. If you decide to do what Hugo did and take everything, that immediately exceeds everything that the capabilities that our Public Works Department has. You're going to have somebody else come in here and haul it, sort it. You get into a lot more questions about, are we going to then go after insurance proceeds for debris removal? Cities have done that. You get into a whole slew of things. So we would implore you that we'll put a schedule out there. We can, we'll be at this block this day and so forth. And yes, people are going to put stuff out there, but that's part of that clear communication that needs to happen out there immediately. Because yes, people are going to, it's easy to at least clear the road so a fire truck can get through. It may take them weeks and weeks and weeks to do this. The other question that I think is very important for us to ask, and for you to constantly be asking too, is what's not getting done now? If Steve's folks are 4 weeks of debris removal, or even 2 or 3 weeks, again, that scenario, it's pretty easy to where we're taking the debris, unless they're full. But does that mean that the soccer field's not getting cut? And you have a soccer tournament coming to town, so we might have to hire that out to get mowed. There's a lot of, it's important just to remember what's not getting done, because it's all hands on deck and things aren't gonna get done that are, yeah, absolutely.
Policy questions or decision points, so you declare an emergency and then within 3 days, we call a special meeting of the city council to extend that. And then there's an evaluation of the needs and what we really need, and some timelines are not gonna happen right away. Would we have would you envision another special meeting as many days later as we kind of develop that plan and how to go about that?
Mayor, members of council, if something like this happened, I think it would be important, at least on a daily basis for initial briefings. You're going to probably have every person up for election that's going to want to come here and do a site. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to be clued in on and here to kind of take the governor for a tour, or, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things, but, and there's a few other, you know, kind of that immediate 48-hour stuff that you're going to have, and the last thing we want is you not to be informed to get the most accurate information that has. So I would envision a daily, at least for the first 48 to 72 hours, and then we would assess those briefings after on a need basis.
And one important thing to recognize is that the maximum is 3 days, but I would suspect that we would relatively quickly, like daylight, we would have the council in to get an initial assessment, and then we would probably have some things on the table that we need decisions on.
Just, you know, I understand the declaration for me, but then, you know, my colleagues are very vital to this as we make policy decisions together, and how often that would happen. Councilor Lehman?
When we hire outside contractors, private contractors to mow the soccer fields because we're busy dealing with an emergency with our own personnel, that cost goes into part of the cost that's recoverable during the emergency. So that has to be tracked. And, you know, what's key on this, and I've been through a few of these with this chief and a past chief, but what's key and critical is when we talk about what do we do with all this debris. We're gonna open up the main streets that emergency services and infrastructure folks need to use to do their assessments, their jobs, and protection of life and infrastructure first. But what's critical here is the communication piece between the emergency responders, the staff people, the council, and everybody to the general public of, okay, we're taking the streets that are blocking these streets out of the way. If you have debris on your property, if you want to stack it in a pile on that property, thank you. You know, a later date, you'll be able to call private contractors to put a dumpster on your property. Please get a hold of your insurance company. They'll come out and help you take care of this mess. If you do notice a gas leak or something like that, please call us right away. You know, they're going to be turning stuff off, and these are the infrastructure pieces that they're going to be assessing right away to save property and life and make the safety decisions, you know.
Okay. Chief?
But that communication piece is critical because you can tell the masses what's going on and be consistent across the board.
From a planning and development standpoint, Michael has 7 staff members right now that can red tag a house and condemn it. Again, look back at that map. How long is that going to take them? There is, in every single city council tornado scenario that I've seen, they have always put on hold like a 30-day pause in building permits, suspending all planning applications. Depending on where we are, annexation agreements, and it'll be key again for Michael, what's not getting done now? And realistically, how many houses are your folks doing a day? And what is that time frame out? 30 days might be 60 days in terms of new building permits. And again, it all goes back to communication. That's why anytime you ever have a debrief on anything, it's always, what could we have done better? Communicate, communicate, communicate. Probably, again, depending on the housing needs, you might have to waive our manufactured home park residential requirements, so allow FEMA trailers to come in and set up shop for a while. Things like that we'll be able to determine quickly in the first 48 hours. But again, there'll be several things, and I'll kind of get into the fee waivers here at the end, because there's some interesting things that cities see from residents in these tornado events, or we see that kind of devastation. Let's talk about donations and volunteers. One of the worst things that anybody in the city could do would be to say, we need help, we need this, we need that, because this is Minnesota. You know, every community, people are going to come pouring in no matter what. It has to be a coordinated, organized operation. Key policy decision right away. Is the city going to handle financial donations for those victims of the tornado? Some cities have. I will tell you, they've ruled the day they did that and they stopped. It's one more thing to encumber. We can push people to a Red Cross, GoFundMe pages. My recommendation there, we push that out. That shouldn't be the responsibility of the city. Donations can be tricky and can be risky too, because what do people usually send in these? It's kind of a joke amongst a lot of emergency managers. You're going to get crates of bananas. Well, how long do those last? And there are some bad optics of cities and municipalities throwing that stuff away, and the message that sends. We're not going to get the things we truly need. We're going to have the resources and the assistance to feed our people that are out there working hard, and make sure they're getting the right breaks and so forth. When it comes to volunteers, again, we've got to be very, very careful there. We own them. If we use them, we got to make sure they have the proper safety briefings. They fall under our workers' comp. It is again, a specific unit that would need to be managed. And one of the ways we can get help from that is from Minnesota VOAD. That's the Voluntary Organizations Active in a Disaster. The state duty officer will assist with that. That's your Red Cross, your Salvation Army, Animal Disaster Coalition. Pets are a big, big deal, and we do have to find shelter for pets. And you probably have to have somebody that's just managing issues with pets and people trying to find where their dog is. Again, we usually get all the wrong stuff when people just flat out donate. So communicating very, very clearly what it is we need, if we need anything at all. When you shift into long-term, and eventually we would shift into a longer-term thing, these are, clearly kind of obvious things. But I want to talk a little bit about this page a little bit. Funding debris removal, policy decision. You have all these homes that are leveled. It is inevitable somebody's going to take the insurance money and leave, and we're going to be stuck with a home there that's, with their basement's a swimming pool, it's an unsafe structure. At what point do we, as a council, say, this is a public hazard and we need to go in and clean it up? When we do that, there may be, if we're doing it for safety reasons, that can factor in those costs into any type of reimbursement. Mr. Kursky brought up a good point. Sometimes the earlier you get in there, the better and cheaper, because if mold starts growing, the costs start growing in terms of but I don't think it matters what neighborhood you go into. Somebody's going to abandon a property. What do we do with that property?
I've actually went through 2 typhoons and 2 hurricanes, and the hurricanes in Pensacola, it's inevitable that we would end up not only being responsible for the debris removal and everything else for a property, but we would ultimately get that property at the end of the day due to the non-payment of taxes. And that's why Pensacola is famous for having as many parks as the city of Philadelphia. We had 98 parks when I left in Pensacola, and a lot of that simply was land that we couldn't then put it back on the tax roll because nobody wanted to purchase it, so.
Property tax issues. You will get somebody that comes in here before you and says, my house was assessed at $400,000. That isn't even a house anymore. It's a flat piece of ground. I'm asking the city to waive my property taxes. It happens every single time. There is one program in the state. There's a relief for damaged and destroyed properties fund that's out there that does give relief to the taxpayer and reimburses the city for the lost property tax revenue. It's complicated. You're going to find in a scenario like this, there are a lot of different silos in terms of funding. Nate would get one heck of a workout here because depending on what's destroyed, obviously there's some for farmland, there's some for road projects, there's formulas if a road is significantly damaged by a storm. I know schools, I think there's one specific for schools, so lots of different silos of where relief can come from, and it is a little cumbersome and confusing, but there is some property tax issues out there. However, somebody's going to come here and say, I'm 76 years old, I can't afford to rebuild, I can't pay these property taxes, can you help me out? And it's going to be difficult when they're sitting right there in front of you. So again, I think it's important to have these things percolating because these are the kinds of decisions you're going to have. Building permits is another one. People are going to come in because we know this because they've done it everywhere else. They're going to come in and say, as a council, will you waive the building permit fees for any construction or rebuild that is storm related? As a council, do you want to do that? That's going to be a decision point in your lap. I think Michael and I are going to say no as a recommendation, but that is something that is going to be a significant, that comes up every single time. If we do have claims against private insurance, if we do have to go on private property, we try and get indemnification signed before we go on that, but I know, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in '98, the fire department cut some trees down for people that were elderly and couldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend we do that in 2022, but those requests will come in. So there could be claims that we make as a city against the insurance companies of other.
And Chief, here again, the building permit, so if your house is destroyed or damaged and it needs to be fixed or rebuilt, the building permits required for that repair is covered in your insurance policy.
It is, but people are going to come to you with any hardship you can think of and ask you for.
Or they're coming to double dip. They're getting reimbursed from their insurance company and they don't want to pay it and they want to pocket it. So, but it is covered under your insurance. I did go through a fire years ago and the insurance company paid for the permits to fix the house.
There are, again, depending on where in town this happens, some cities have created special TIF districts in terms of rebuilding to kind of spur that growth. And again, depends on where the damage has occurred. I find this one kind of interesting, changes to building codes. I'm not aware of a city that has had a significant tornado to go through that where the council did not down the road significant or make any changes to their current building code and strengthen them. Hugo, for example, I think actually you have to have an interior room now in your house, which is a very strong code. But that is something that might come before you, and at least maybe a proposal. We have good codes right now, but
More improvements than changes.
Correct.
I envisioned it as you change it so to allow a little leniency, but I see what you're saying.
Is that for an on-grade home or one with a full basement? Because that would make
I don't
no
know
sense.
specifically, Councilor,
It would make no
what Hugo
sense
has. I
to-
know they had I remember reading it and going, I don't know that would pass in Shakopee.
It doesn't make any sense if you've got a regular basement.
One of the other issues that isn't mentioned on this particular slide, but really is a major issue, is predatory repair people that will sweep in. And frankly, one of the things that we would have to do is we would have to set up a system where Michael's people basically would license these people to come in order to be doing work in our city, because otherwise you're going to see the fly-by-nights come in and they'll do very shoddy workmanship at a very high price.
Somehow have some sort of vetting system, and
Yep.
I know in the moment,
Yep.
it's very difficult, but the aftermath of some of these, and I do read enough articles that the vultures, as they call them, and then actually they come in and leave, and then we hear from the residents.
Yep,
Would that be under an emergency power type thing? Will we
Yes,
take that
absolutely.
responsibility?
correct.
Some of those predatory folks, and I'm sure Mr. Reynolds has probably seen this in the hurricanes, because that's usually where the example comes from.
Yep.
If you're contracting out for debris removal and you're paying per trip, better have somebody there watching how full those loads are. It's a crying shame how many examples you see in some of this training of half-full dump trucks when you're trying to, so there will be people that try and take advantage of the city. Again, if this happened this month or tomorrow, how long does it take to get supplies now? And even a new refrigerator is how many, so when I talk about, again, the property tax issue, that might be part of what somebody says. Look, I'd love to have my home completely, rebuilt, but it's not going to be done for X amount of time, and I'm looking for property tax relief. And again, I circle back to that last bullet point about what's not getting done. Staff is going to get exhausted probably pretty quick, even if we're running 12-hour shifts, modified schedules. You're going to have a lot of people, this is where you talk with HR, might be working out of classification, doing different jobs, just what you need to do. But staff's going to get tired, and inevitably things aren't going to get done. Things are going to be pushed back, and I think the sooner we communicate that to whether it's a developer or somebody wanting to put a new deck on in an area that's not affected, I think the better. So a good question to keep asking staff during any briefing. I mentioned the EOP that's coming. I do have, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the date here in May, a tentative hold date meeting with SPOC, obviously. They would be an integral part of everything we do in a cleanup and emergency situation. You're going to have power issues. We have, as you know, you approved the use of our COVID relief funds for new civil defense sirens. They have been ordered. They are on their way. That'll take care of some of Windermere, the new growth that we have. It is going to replace a few, and we're moving a few around the city because of our growth. When it's done, I can show you the map. It significantly increases our civil defense siren coverage for the city of Shakopee, which overall is very good. And those have a good shelf life. We lose one to lightning about every 3 years, but get it replaced, and we have good coverage overall. I think the other thing that it's hard because you're working so hard, sometimes people won't want to go home. You're dealing with angry residents. No matter what, we're never going to be able to work fast enough. If there's, and I think that's a good communication piece too. Set realistic expectations. In this country in 2022, we all want everything right now. We want to know when can I get my home replaced? When can I get this? I don't want to live in a FEMA trailer. The reality is it's going to take time. We have to be there for the community that's impacted, and we certainly would be. But in terms of long-term communication, vital to folks. So with that, Mayor and Council, that's kind of my quick update for you. And if you are interested, I know, I don't know if all the department heads know this or not, but we're going to move, kind of get into a tabletop, hopefully a facilitated tabletop sometime here in the future. And if that is something that you want, I have something else in a work session, hopefully planned for you down the road in terms of officer-involved shootings. But we can certainly incorporate a more in-depth type of tabletop. And I think it would be, again, the original plan was to have some folks come in that have been through this and speak to you directly. So you're not just hearing it from me that, yes, we've been through some declarations, we've had some significant flooding and wind damage, but we haven't had homes, completely leveled for blocks. So hearing from them sometimes can help too.
Scenarios, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Chief, I appreciate your update and review, along with the fire department. Thank you. This is very vital. We don't, plan for the unexpected. I know that we haven't had a tabletop exercise in a long time. I took part in one from the county 20 years ago. I feel in the discussion and listening and watching your slides, a lot has changed in the response and how you respond and the type of impacts that you have compared to 20 years ago. So a good refresher on this. I think communication is vital in how you do that. I watch a lot of communities, and when they have a situation, and some are better than others. Single point communication, I know the Chief and Mr. Reynolds and I have talked about this, and you start saying, most of the successful ones say, we'll have another update at 10 o'clock or the next day in the morning, or you can kind of, you're going to give a shot of information, but then there's not going to be 6, 8 hours, 12 hours with no information. Everybody knows that and expect it. So I think there's a lot to think about. I think lots have changed. The policy impacts that might last 6 months after the fact, right, as we work through some of these issues. And I love your aspect of what are we missing, what's not getting done. I think we kind of, in the moment, you're focused, but you got to think a little outside the box and go, what's not being done, and that next step plan ahead. So, but other comments?
Just, I think that the scenarios too, it's not just the tornado scenario anymore, it's.
There's much more to
who
it.
knows, so.
Talk about natural disaster, and we've had floods and windstorms here, but certainly we've learned in society over the last 20 years that could be something different too. Again, Councilor Brennan?
I had gone through the community response training a number of years ago, and I think that was Tom Pitschneider was the trainer at that time, and I thought that was really good information for me as a community member, and knowing how to take care of myself in those emergencies, and also if I needed to my neighborhood. Is that still offered by Shakopee?
I guess not. Chief Coleman saying no.
Mayor,
Okay.
members of council, we're talking about the CERT program, and I know, Councilor Lehman, you've been through that as well. It was run, I think we taught one part of, 9 or 10 sessions. The fire department did the other. We had a CERT program going for several years. It has not been here for, I think, well over a decade. The reason, it was time consuming, and how do you keep people engaged? We really, really struggled with finding time to get people that have been through that training, and I do see, there is value to it. The problem is, from a staffing standpoint, how do you keep them engaged? You got your hard hat and your certificate, but if you're not following up with people consistently and building up a network, that takes time, resources, and funding, and ultimately it is one of those things that fell off the map. If I can briefly, I failed to mention, I know Scott County is trying to get some funds, and I think they're going to get them for a specific FEMA course for elected officials. So that is something I think they will be offering to everybody when that goes out. It's a FEMA class. You're going to see a lot of slides. You've been warned when it comes to that type of thing. And, again, we haven't done a lot of stuff necessarily with department heads and council, but we have had full-scale exercises, whether it's an active shooter at Valley Fair or, and it's sprinkled usually a little bit around the county, but we do tabletop and do some full-scale exercises that that's more of that operational immediate response focus. I will also, I didn't bring them up here with me, but before you get out, I'm going to stick each of you with an emergency management handbook for government officials. So it's, again, easy. It is an easy read, and it's something that just kind of highlights a lot of the stuff that we just talked about. It talks a little bit about purpose of emergency declarations and some of the different forms and samples and so forth.
Counselor Lehman.
Scenario-based tabletop that I participated in was a good experience. I think a lot of information was gathered. It was pretty, that one at the time was really involved because it had a big binder and it went through the whole scenario and everything, but I don't know if we have to go that extreme, but I think a scenario-based, subtype of scenario-based basic tabletop would be good for the council. And then from my personal take, there's really two kinds of emergencies. One that directly impacts people immediately, and one that nobody sees, but is an emergency, and then they're affected later. And then they start complaining because now all of a sudden the water isn't flowing or something. We knew the emergency was there a month ago when the floods took out the downtown sewer along the riverbank, but nobody else knew it. And 3 weeks later, things started backing up, and now we've got a problem. You know, that's the kind of emergency that happens up front. Nobody knows about it in the general public. And I should probably clarify that didn't actually happen. I made this up. You know, that wasn't a true scenario, but I'm saying that type of infrastructure emergency that nobody knows actually happened.
I thought of Flint when you said that.
Well, there you go. That's a good example, actually. That's a perfect example of an emergency that nobody knows about until after the fact.
Okay. Other questions? Chief?
Well, we'll start working on, some type of scenario-based exercise, and it's good for everybody too. Rick and I know we've been through a number of these, and we have other folks that are going through these classes too, and it's good for them to, we're not always going to be here, and maybe our houses were affected, and we're not able to come in. So those types, there's benefit to some staff that haven't been through those as well. So we'll put something together here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so moving forward then, I guess we're up to 11A. Our city bill list is in front of us. Any questions, comments on that for our review? Seeing none then, we would do 11B, which is our liaison administration report, and we will start with Councilor Lehman.
I don't have a report tonight, Mayor.
I appreciate that, thank you. Councilor Brennan.
Thank you. SPEC met last night and we approved the audit. And there was no significant issues that were brought forth on the audit, so that was good news. The Live, Learn, and Earn Housing Committee has been reviewing or talking about homeless housing, and that seems to be their priority for this coming year is to discuss homeless housing and
Discuss it.
yeah, and the feeling is that the vouchers and is that vouchers are good for homeless housing and to solve those problems, and I had brought up to the group, well, I think there's some negative sides of that, so I had asked Mr. Reynolds to put information together. So I think you've all received that, and I'm going to be giving that to the Live, Learn, and Earn Committee to see how they want to progress with that, because I think one of the comments was on NIMBY and NIMBYism, and I said, the reality is that you have to solve some of these issues in order to address NIMBYism. So that's where I'm going with it. I'll let you know how that goes with that committee on the topic. I think there's going to be some surprise in the information that I Chief Tate and Mr. Reynolds has provided. So it should be interesting. That's all I got.
Counselor Brennan, thank you very much. Counselor Whiting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last Wednesday, the chamber met. We got to say goodbye to our city staff member, Jen Brewington. A few events that are coming up for the chamber I thought I'd mention. That shows the State of the City on May 5th. Is that?
Thursday.
That's coming up. There's also going to be a women's event at Mystic Lake on the 19th, May 19th. May 26th, Friends of Main Street Banquet. I know many of you have attended that in the past. That was for the chamber. Also, MVTA met that same Wednesday. We talked about a new program to install the new destination signs on the buses. You know, those got to be replaced, things like that. Had a report from the Suburban Transit Authority Group. We also talked about that first quarter ridership report that I asked Mr. Reynolds to send out to you, which shows a lot of people going back on the bus. So,
a lot of progress.
you know, compared over last year, we're still not back to pre-COVID, but things are moving up. So
That was very encouraging.
there also, MVTA offered a bus to certain events that I sent to staff that they could use as a band dressing room or cooling off point, so they're going to utilize that if they can. So that's all I have.
Counselor Whiting, thank you very much. Counselor Contreras.
Thank you, Mayor. So I attended the school board meeting April 25th, where the swear-in for the newest board member, Carolyn Valdez, took place. Also, there was acceptance of many resignations, approval of contracts for the 2023 school year, and the announcement that Dave Orlowski is retiring. His last day is July 25th, and the importance to this is that he was started as the Sweeney principal, 6th grade center principal, data and testing administrator, an interim superintendent, and an assistant superintendent. So he's played many hats. He's done very much. And he's such a genuine person. He's a problem solver in my eyes. Anything that's happening, and he's always happy. I mean, many things have happened in this past year, in his personal life, and his life has shifted, and, he's needing to prioritize his life now. So he will be retiring, and God, I don't know.
He'll be missed.
I know, he'll be missed.
Bittersweet. I know him, and you're right. He's very positive for the school district, and, bittersweet on the loss from the school district, but congratulations on the retiring. So.
Yep. And one last thing, the ribbon cutting for the Sabre Fields and for the Bill Farmer and Mark Nye Wrestling Multi-Purpose Room will be held, I wrote it down, on the, what was it? Sorry. Yes, May 16th. Sorry, yeah, May 16th. And the Sabres Field will be at 3 o'clock at the Sabre Fields, and then at the West Middle School for those for the multi-purpose room at 3:45. So.
Bill Farmer, been in wrestling for so many years. Mark Nye, they're both great guys.
And I'm hoping, because my son was like, oh, is Mr. Nye, Coach Nye going to be there? And I'm like, I hope so too. We haven't seen him in a while. He retired too, so. And then not liaisons, but I attended the cleanup day on Saturday and the Omri groundbreaking over at Canterbury, so. Busy time.
Yeah, good. Counselor Contreras, thank you very much. I just have a couple items. Attended the Southern Valley Alliance banquet last Friday. Hops and hot dish. So the tater tot hot dish, pleased to report it's very good. Great organization, a lot of good resources. Check it out. If yourself or someone else is involved in not a good relationship and things like that, call this organization 24/7. Great opportunity to. I also worked in the rain on Saturday.
You guys had a tent.
Huh?
You had a tent.
I was out in the middle. My tennis shoes squeaked when I was done. But great to see the residents of Shakopee come out and clean it all up, so that is great. Also today, I did speak at Rotary, and a couple more things. This Thursday at 2:30, Representative Angie Craig will be in town at Huber Park to showcase the start of, you know, the riverbank stabilization. She was successful in securing, helping secure $3.5 million. We're still waiting on our efforts from the state, which we won't know till the end of the month probably. But nice little event on Thursday at 2:30 at Huber Park. And lastly, I want to mention Roof, Park in the Park, Saturday, May 14th at Lions Park from 10 to noon, and you got to register. So I know this has been a very successful event in the past, and I would expect nothing less. Bring your dogs, get involved, have some fun in conjunction with the police department. So also coming up, Happy Mom's Day. And we will move forward to our administration report. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was pretty rough.
It was.
And on that note, just to let you all know that both Assistant City Administrator and what was your new title? What did we?
This
Partnership Liaison, and I will be up north for a conference leaving tomorrow, and we'll be gone till Friday afternoon. Chief Tate will be in charge, and he's the official number 3, so all the issues that you want solved, I certainly hope that you will contact Chief Tate. Other than that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's great. We can call Chief Tate tomorrow then.
I got some issues, yeah.
Item number 12, other business. Is there any other business before this council? Any other business? Seeing none? Counselor Whiting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 17th at 7 p.m.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Happy Mom's Day coming up. And any further discussion?
Is it a roll call vote?
That's right. And by roll call then, with no further discussion, thank you.
Councilmember Brennan?
Aye.
Councilmember Lehman?
Aye.
Whiting? Councilmember Contreras?
Aye.
Mayor Mars?
Aye. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned at 9:12 p.m.